A little girl was scavenging for food in the trash when a millionaire saw her wearing a necklace identical to the one his missing sister had. When he discovered the truth about the child, everything changed. What happened after that discovery would forever alter both of their destinies. Subscribe to the channel for heartwarming stories every day. The rain lashed against the city with relentless fury that winter night. Fat drops hammered the asphalt as the wind howled through the buildings like a wounded animal. For most people, it was just another storm to watch from the windows of heated apartments. But not for her. The girl trembled violently, huddled behind the dumpsters of a closed-down diner. Her dark hair, matted and dirty, clung to her pale face marked by life on the streets. Her small, rough hands rummaged tirelessly through the discarded scraps, driven by the hunger that had gnawed at her stomach for days. 7 years old and no place to call home. No name to be called except for the cruel nicknames she received from the other street kids. Rat, filthy, ghost, temporary identities for an existence that many preferred to ignore. When her trembling fingers found a piece of partially moldy bread, her eyes lit up as if she had discovered a treasure. She gripped it tightly, almost reverently, and a fragile smile touched her lips, chapped from dehydration. "Finally," she whispered to herself, her voice almost inaudible under the roar of the storm. At that exact moment, the smooth purr of a powerful engine cut through the noise of the rain. Bright headlights illuminated the alley, and a black car, gleaming like obsidian, parked abruptly next to the dumpsters. The girl instinctively shrank back further, clutching the bread against her thin chest like a cornered animal. From inside the vehicle, an imposing figure emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, clad in a perfectly tailored suit that must have cost more than many people earned in months. The millionaire walked with firm strides to the back entrance of the diner, seemingly indifferent to the rain that now soaked his impeccable attire. He wasn't in the habit of frequenting this location, much less using the service entrance, but the establishment belonged to him, like so many others in the city, and that night, his insomnia had led him to a surprise inspection. Years of ruthless deals and calculated decisions had built his empire, but also created around him an aura of loneliness that was almost palpable. It was as he turned to return to the car that his eyes caught a movement in the shadows. For an instant, something gleaming flashed on the child's neck, reflecting the light from the headlights. The millionaire froze. The girl, frightened, tried to recoil even further, but the cold wall stopped her. The movement caused the pendant she wore around her neck to sway slightly, a star broken in half, hanging on a gold chain worn smooth with time. The man felt as if he had been punched in the chest. That pendant. It was impossible. His breath hitched, and for a moment the mask of indifference he had worn for years slipped, revealing something he had long tried to suppress. Vulnerability. "Where did you get that?" His voice came out rough, louder than he intended. The girl didn't answer, just clutched the object to her chest with her free hand, wide, fearful eyes fixed on the stranger who seemed suddenly distraught. "The necklace. Where did it come from?" he insisted, taking a step towards her. "It's mine," she finally replied, her voice thin and trembling. "My mom gave it to me, said it would protect me. You can't take it." The millionaire felt the world spin around him. That object was identical to the other half that he kept locked in a safe in his mansion, the half that had belonged to his sister. Before she disappeared 8 years ago, running away pregnant, rejected by her own family, by him. The rain continued to fall relentlessly on both of them, but neither seemed to notice. Two completely opposite worlds, connected by a small metal object that contained stories that neither of them was prepared to face. With a slow movement, as if approaching a wild animal, the millionaire took off his overcoat and, surprising himself, extended it towards the girl. "You'll get sick in this rain," he said, trying to soften his tone. "Come on, I can help." The girl hesitated, her eyes darting between the coat and the stranger's face. Years on the streets had taught her to distrust any kindness. But there was something inexplicable about this man, something that, against all logic, made her extend her trembling hand and accept the offered protection. Neither of them could imagine that this simple gesture would be the first step of a journey that would forever change their lives. The inside of the car was another universe. The smell of expensive leather and rich wood contrasted violently with the odor of dirt and abandonment that emanated from the girl. She remained motionless in the back seat, wrapped in the millionaire's coat that seemed to swallow her whole, observing every detail with wide, distrustful eyes. The millionaire drove in silence, stealing glances in the rearview mirror. His mind was a whirlwind of questions, doubts, and painful memories that he had been trying to bury for years under layers of cultivated indifference. "Where are you taking me?" The small voice cut through the silence, filled with barely disguised fear. "To a safe place," he replied curtly, without taking his eyes off the road. "You need food, a bath, and dry clothes." "I'm not going to any shelter," she protested suddenly, grabbing onto the seat. "They'll separate me from my necklace. They've tried before." The man gripped the steering wheel tightly. "No one will take your necklace. I promise." The word promise slipped out of his mouth before he could contain it, surprising both of them. How long had it been since he had promised something to someone? Years, maybe. Promises meant commitment, and commitment meant vulnerability. Two things he avoided at all costs. The mansion loomed imposingly after the electronic gates opened. A modern construction of straight lines and glass, designed to impress more than to welcome. It was his refuge and his prison, a monument to his voluntary solitude. When the car stopped at the entrance, the girl remained motionless, as if fearing that any movement might break some invisible rule. "You can get out," he said, opening the door for her. The housekeeper, a middle-aged woman with a perpetually serious expression, appeared at the front door. Her look of surprise at seeing the child was quickly masked by years of professional discretion. "Prepare a hot bath and find some clothes," ordered the millionaire. "And food. She's starving." "Yes, sir," she replied mechanically, though her eyes betrayed 1,000 unasked questions. Hours later, transformed by hot water and wearing clean clothes that the housekeeper had found, the girl looked like a different person. The bruises on her arms and legs, previously hidden by dirt, were now painfully visible, telling stories that the millionaire wasn't sure he wanted to hear. She ate slowly, almost reverently, each bite of food, sitting at the immense kitchen table. Her eyes remained alert, ready to flee at the slightest sign of danger. "What's your name?" the millionaire asked, watching her from the other end of the table. The girl swallowed a piece of bread before answering. "I don't really know. The woman who took care of me called me lots of different names. Depended if she was happy or mad." "And your mother, the one who gave you the necklace?" The child's face darkened. "I don't remember her much. She was pretty, spoke softly, cried at night when she thought I was asleep. One day she left me with the other woman, put this necklace around my neck and said she'd be back, but she never came back." The housekeeper, who was discreetly observing everything, saw something rare happen. The eyes of her boss, normally cold and calculating, welled up for a fleeting moment. "This woman who took care of you afterwards, where is she?" "Gone, weeks ago," the girl replied, shrugging her shoulders. "One day she left and didn't come back. Some days she acted weird, talked to herself, let bad men into the apartment. That's when I started running to the streets." That night, while the child slept in one of the guest rooms, the millionaire locked himself in his study. With trembling hands, he typed messages to 3 different numbers: his lawyer, his personal physician, and his private investigator. To the last one, he sent a picture of the girl's necklace along with a single sentence: "I need answers. urgent. Later, alone in the darkness of the bedroom, he opened the safe built into the wall. From within, he retrieved a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed the other half of the broken star, identical to the one the girl carried. Laura. He whispered his sister's name for the first time in years, while holding the pendant against his chest. "What have you done?" The morning light seeped lazily through the half-open curtains, dancing on the sleeping girl's face. For a few moments, watching her from the doorway, the millionaire allowed himself to imagine a different life. One where that child had grown up safely, under the care of his sister, perhaps even under his own roof. A world where he hadn't been. A coward, where his family hadn't fragmented like that broken star. When the girl finally opened her eyes, she startled instantly. She sat up in the bed, which was too big for her small body, looking frantically around until her gaze met that of the man standing in the doorway. "I thought I was dreaming," she murmured, instinctively running her fingers over the necklace. "It wasn't a dream," he replied, maintaining a safe distance. "Did you sleep well?" She nodded, though her eyes revealed otherwise. The millionaire suspected that truly restful nights were rare in her short existence. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked abruptly, with a frankness that only children possess. "You're rich. Rich people never look at people like me." The question hit him like a slap, exposing the uncomfortable truth of his own existence. Had he really become the kind of person who turned a blind eye to the suffering of others? "Your necklace," he finally replied, settling on partial honesty. "It reminded me of someone important." "Who?" "My sister." The girl frowned, absorbing the information with a seriousness beyond her years. "Is she dead?" The question hung in the air like smoke. 8 years without news, 8 years of fruitless searches that he had eventually abandoned, convincing himself that it was better that way, that Laura had chosen her path. "I don't know," he admitted, the words coming out like stones from his throat. "She left." Something in the tone of his voice must have communicated more than he intended, because the girl nodded as if she perfectly understood the meaning of losses and unexplained absences. The arrival of the millionaire's personal physician broke that moment of strange connection. A discreet, middle-aged man who carried a black bag and decades of well-compensated confidentiality. "I need to examine her," the millionaire explained to the girl, who immediately recoiled against the headboard, "to make sure you're healthy." "I don't want medicine," she protested. "The woman gave me medicine that made me sleep all day." The doctor and the millionaire exchanged worried glances. "No one will give you anything you don't need," the doctor assured her with professional gentleness. "I just want to see how your health is." The examination revealed what years of neglect and poverty had caused: moderate malnutrition, anemia, some initial respiratory problems, and multiple injuries in different stages of healing. Nothing that proper care couldn't resolve, the doctor assured him, discreetly handing the millionaire an envelope for DNA testing, along with the prescription for vitamins and supplements. "I need a few drops of saliva," the doctor explained to the girl with a reassuring smile, showing her the swab. "That way, we can find out if you have any special allergies." The little half-truth worked, and minutes later, the doctor left, taking with him the genetic material that could confirm the suspicion growing in the millionaire's chest. The morning passed in a strange dance of approach and detachment, the millionaire trying to keep himself busy with phone calls and video conferences while the housekeeper showed the girl around the house. From time to time, he caught himself watching her through the window of his study, admiring the way her eyes, once opaque with fear, now sparkled as she discovered the garden and the small fountain. It was during lunch that the first storm formed. "I need to leave," the girl announced suddenly, placing her fork next to her half-eaten plate. "Why?" asked the millionaire, genuinely surprised. "Aren't you safe and comfortable here?" "I am. That's why I need to go. Good things don't last for people like me." The sentence, spoken with the terrible resignation of someone who had learned too early about the cruelty of the world, caused a lump in the man's throat. "You're not going anywhere," he declared firmly. "At least not until we find out more about you and about this necklace, understand?" The sudden harshness in his voice made the girl shrink back, but a glint of defiance remained in her eyes. "What if I run away? Then I'll find you and bring you back." Not even he fully understood the reason for his insistence. Maybe it was the possibility of finding answers about Laura, or maybe something deeper that he couldn't yet name. The fact was that the idea of that child going back to the streets was unbearable to him. On the afternoon of the third day, when the investigator arrived with the first results, the millionaire had already cancelled 3 important meetings and postponed a business trip. Unthinkable behaviors for a man known for his obsessive dedication to work. "I located the woman the girl mentioned," the investigator reported in a low voice in the carefully closed study. "A certain Marcia Regina, known in the underworld as Cedar, petty scams, some cases of selling controlled medications, and..." He hesitated, glancing at the door. "Records of involvement with child trafficking." The millionaire paled. "And my sister? Any leads?" "Nothing conclusive yet, but there's one thing you need to see." The investigator slid a folder containing copies of old documents across the table: birth certificates, hospital records, and most disturbingly, a death certificate. Laura Silver, deceased during childbirth approximately 7 years ago, in an illegal clinic on the outskirts of town. The child survived and was registered simply as newborn. The room suddenly seemed too small, the air thin. The millionaire leaned on the table, trying to process that devastating information. "Are you absolutely sure it's my sister?" "I can't confirm for sure until we have the DNA results, but the dates match, and so does the physical description." At that moment, a small figure appeared in the half-open door of the study. The girl watched the 2 men with distrustful eyes and a closed expression. "You're talking about me?" It wasn't a question, but a statement. "Yes," admitted the millionaire after a long silence. "We're trying to find out who you are." "I already know who I am. I'm nobody. That's why nobody's ever really wanted me." And before she could be stopped, she turned and ran to the bedroom, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the empty mansion. The millionaire stood motionless in front of the closed door of the guest room, his fist raised, hesitating between knocking or simply walking away. He had never been good with words of comfort, not even when Laura needed them most. What could he say now to a child who carried 7 years of abandonment on her shoulders? Finally, he took a deep breath and knocked gently. "Go away," came the muffled reply from inside. Ignoring the request, he turned the doorknob and entered. The girl was huddled by the window, hugging her knees. She had taken off the new clothes and put back on the rags she had arrived in, as if preparing to return to the streets. "What are you doing?" he asked, frowning. "Getting ready. It's easier this way. When people decide they don't want me anymore." Something in that childish, yet brutally adult logic completely disarmed him. He crossed the room and, surprising both of them, sat on the floor next to her. "No one's going to send you away," he said with a gentleness he didn't know he possessed. "Not today, not tomorrow." Distrustful eyes met his. "Why not? Everyone always does." The millionaire sighed deeply. How to explain the whirlwind of emotions that had consumed him since he had seen that necklace? How to say that he suspected she was his niece, daughter of the sister he had abandoned when she needed him most? Because he searched for the right words, because maybe we have each other now. The simplicity of the sentence contained a truth he was barely beginning to accept. That barefoot, distrustful child could be his only remaining family. "Can I see your necklace?" he asked gently. After a moment of hesitation, she took the chain from her neck and handed it to him, keeping her eyes fixed on him, as if fearing he would run away with her treasure. "I have something to show you too." He took the small velvet box from his pocket and opened it, revealing the other half of the star. With slightly trembling hands, he brought the two parts together. They fit perfectly, like pieces of a puzzle. Long separated, the girl's eyes widened. "It's the same. They're two halves of the same star," he explained. "This part was my sister's, and this," he pointed to her necklace, "if you really received it from your mother, then your sister was my mother," she completed with a perspicacity that surprised him. "That's what we're trying to find out." The next day, while awaiting the results of the DNA test, the millionaire made an impulsive decision that didn't match his meticulously calculating personality. He cancelled all appointments and invited the girl for a trip. The upscale shopping mall wasn't the most suitable environment for a child accustomed to the streets, but it was the only place he could think of at the moment. The girl walked beside him, looking in wonder at the colorful shop windows and elegantly dressed people, holding tightly to the millionaire's hand as if fearing to get lost in that strange world. "You can choose whatever you want," he said, stopping in front of a toy store. She looked at him suspiciously. "Anything. Anything!" The expectation was that she would run to the most expensive or flashy toy, as most children would. Instead, after a long and careful inspection, she chose a simple, medium-sized brown teddy bear with a red ribbon around its neck. "Just that?" he asked, surprised. "He has sad eyes," she explained, hugging the bear. "Like yours. I thought he needed a friend." The unexpected comment hit him like a punch in the stomach. It had been years since anyone had observed him so deeply, with such raw honesty. After the toy store came the clothes, the shoes, and a stop for ice cream. The girl tasted each flavor as if it were a transcendental experience, closing her eyes and smiling in a way that completely transformed her face. For the first time, the millionaire could see in her traces of Laura, the same discreet smile, the same dimple on her left cheek. It was during the afternoon snack, sitting at a discreet table in a corner of the food court, that she finally opened up. "The woman who took care of me wasn't bad all the time," she said suddenly, playing with a straw. "Sometimes she cried and apologized, said she had no choice, that important people would be angry if she let me go." The millionaire felt a chill run down his spine. "What people?" "I don't know. She never said the names, just that they were men with a lot of money and power." The conversation was interrupted by his cell phone ringing. It was the lab with the DNA test results. The millionaire answered, stepping a few paces away from the table, but keeping his eyes fixed on the girl. The confirmation came clear and unequivocal: genetic compatibility, indicating first-degree kinship. That child was Laura's daughter, his biological niece, the last connection to the sister he had lost. When he returned to the table, his face was pale and his eyes were watery. "Did something bad happen?" asked the girl, hugging the bear tightly. "No," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. "Something good, actually. Very good." That night, back at the mansion, he sat on the edge of her bed to tell her a story. Not just any story, but the story of two children who grew up together, a brother and a sister who loved each other deeply, but whom fate separated because of wrong choices and unspoken words. "What happened to them?" asked the girl, her eyes heavy with sleep. "I don't know the end of that story yet," he replied honestly. "But I think maybe, just maybe, they have a chance to make things right." When she finally fell asleep, the millionaire remained sitting beside her, watching her, peaceful breathing. The emotional fortress he had built over the years began to show deep cracks, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't try to fix them. When the millionaire's lawyer arrived the next morning, he found his client unrecognizable. The man, always impeccably dressed and controlled, seemed to have aged a decade in a few days. Unshaven, deep, dark circles under his eyes, and an intensity in his gaze that bordered on feverish. "I want custody of her," he announced without preamble, as soon as they closed themselves in the study. "She's my niece. I have the genetic proof. I want her to be legally mine." The lawyer, an experienced man who had been navigating the turbulent seas of his client's legal battles for years, calmly placed his briefcase on the table. "It's not that simple," he replied cautiously. "Why not? I'm her only living relative. I have resources. I can offer her everything she needs. We first need to investigate how she ended up on the streets. If she was abandoned, if there are official records. The absence of formal documentation is a serious problem. Then create the necessary documentation," the millionaire snapped, slamming his fist on the table. "Isn't that what I pay you a fortune for?" The lawyer held his gaze without flinching. "You pay me to do things correctly, not to create legal problems that could haunt you in the future. And more importantly," he hesitated briefly, "there's another complicating factor." "What? Ricardo Mendez?" The name fell like a stone in the room. Ricardo Mendez, the millionaire's former partner, now an important political figure with deep connections in power circles. The same man who, years ago, had tried to convince Laura to have an abortion when he discovered her pregnancy. The same one who had threatened to destroy the family's reputation if the scandal came to light, forcing the millionaire to choose between his sister and his empire. And he had chosen wrong. "What does Ricardo have to do with this?" he asked, although he already suspected the answer. "My contact in the police informed me that he's connected to a clandestine adoption ring. There are rumors that inconvenient children were placed in temporary homes under his influence. Like his daughter with my sister." The lawyer nodded. Gravely, "If you proceed with this custody case, he'll do everything to stop you. For Ricardo, this girl is living proof of a scandal that could destroy his political career." The millionaire got up and walked to the window, watching the girl playing in the garden with the housekeeper. Even from a distance, he could see how her behavior had already changed in just a few days. She laughed more, moved with less fear, although she still maintained that constant vigilance of someone who had learned too early to expect the worst from the world. "I don't care what he tries," he said finally, his voice filled with steely determination. "I'm going to protect her with everything I have." The words sounded strange in his own ears. For how long had his life been only about accumulating power and wealth? When was the last time he had set out to fight for someone other than himself? "He's powerful," warned the lawyer. "So am I." The battle began silently. First, a surprise visit from social workers who claimed to have received anonymous complaints about a child in an irregular situation at the mansion. They arrived without warning, with forms and probing looks that barely disguised the true intention behind the visit. The girl, who was playing quietly in the garden when the strangers arrived, immediately regressed to her previous defensive behavior. She retreated to a corner, hugging the teddy bear, vigilant eyes and body tense like a cornered animal. "We need to talk to the child alone," informed the social worker, a middle-aged woman with an impenetrable expression. "She won't leave my sight," replied the millionaire firmly. "Any conversation will be held in my presence." "That can be interpreted as obstruction, sir, and this can be interpreted as intimidation," he retorted, discreetly indicating the security cameras installed in the corners of the room. "My lawyer is on his way. I suggest you wait for him." The mention of the surveillance system and the millionaire's unwavering stance made the visitors temporarily back down. They agreed to conduct only a brief preliminary interview and schedule an official visit later. While answering the basic questions, the millionaire felt the girl's hand seeking his under the table. A small gesture, almost imperceptible but full of meaning. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact, the first demonstration of true trust. Without thinking twice, he wrapped those small fingers between his, feeling a wave of protection so intense that it frightened him. "We're going to fight for you," he whispered when the social workers finally left. "I promise." That night, while the girl slept, the millionaire received a call that confirmed his suspicions. The visit had been orchestrated by Ricardo Mendez. The former partner was moving his pieces, activating his contacts, preparing the ground for what would be a public and cruel battle. The next morning, the first blow came through the newspapers. A small note, strategically positioned in the society column, mentioned how the eccentric businessman, known for his volatile temper, had suddenly taken in a street child, raising questions about his real intentions. "It's just the beginning," warned the lawyer, placing the newspaper on the breakfast table. "He's going to try to destroy your reputation, question your mental and emotional fitness to raise a child." "Let him try," replied the millionaire, watching. The girl who across the table was drawing intently in a new notebook. "I have more to lose now. That makes me more dangerous, not less." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. While the lawyer worked on the legal aspects of the custody petition, gathering documentation and testimonials from professionals attesting to the millionaire's capacity as a guardian, the private investigator continued digging into the dark, past that connected Ricardo Mendez to the clandestine adoption ring. The mansion, once a monument to loneliness, gradually transformed with the presence of the child. Colorful drawings appeared stuck on the refrigerator door. Occasional laughter echoed through the hallways, and the millionaire, without realizing it, began to smile more. It was during one of those rare moments, when they were sharing an afternoon snack on the porch, that the girl asked the question he dreaded so much. "Did you know my mum?" The millionaire swallowed hard, carefully placing his cup on the table. "Yes, she was my younger sister." "What was she like?" The seemingly simple question triggered an avalanche of painfully repressed memories. Laura. At 5, holding his hand on her first day of school. Laura, as a teenager, passionately defending her opinions during formal family dinners. Laura, as an adult, standing in his study, tears streaming down her face while he remained silent in the face of her despair. "She was extraordinary," he said finally, his voice choked with emotion. "Brave, stubborn, loyal. She had a laugh that lit up any room, and eyes just like yours." The girl absorbed each word with the seriousness of someone collecting treasures. "Why did she leave?" "Because I failed her," the truth escaped before he could contain it. "When she needed me most, I chose other priorities." Silence. The girl studied his face for a long moment. "You're sad because of that." It wasn't a question. "Every day," he admitted. She reached out her small hand and touched his face lightly. A surprisingly adult gesture of comfort. "Maybe she can forgive you, even though she's in heaven." The simplicity of the sentence, the purity of that childlike belief in forgiveness, broke something within him. For the first time in decades, the millionaire wept openly, without shame or reservations. And for the most unlikely of reasons, it was a 7-year-old child, marked by her own life of abandonment, who comforted him. The rain lashed against the car windows as they drove down the city's central avenue. The millionaire watched the drops run down the glass, creating ephemeral patterns that resembled tears. Beside him, the girl kept her eyes fixed on the imposing building approaching, the courthouse where, in a few minutes, the preliminary hearing of her custody case would begin. "Are you scared?" he asked, noticing how she was clutching this teddy bear to her chest. "A little," she admitted, her voice almost inaudible under the noise of the storm. "Are you?" The question caught him off guard. No one ever asked if the powerful businessman felt fear. "Yes," he confessed, a new honesty tinging his voice. "Quite a bit." A small smile appeared on the girl's face. "The housekeeper said that brave people feel scared, but they do what they need to anyway." "She's right," he replied, admiring the simple wisdom that now guided his days. The entrance to the courthouse was a spectacle orchestrated by the media. Flashes fired incessantly as the millionaire, with the girl held firmly in his arms, crossed the hall surrounded by security guards. Questions were shouted from all sides. Microphones pushed in his direction, reporters eager for a statement about what was already being called the custody case of the year. "Don't look at them," he murmured to the girl, who was hiding her. A face on his shoulder. "They're just curious people." Inside the designated courtroom, the scene was less chaotic, but equally tense. His lawyer was already waiting for him, surrounded by neatly organized stacks of documents. On the other side, a complete legal team represented the interests of the state, although everyone knew that, in reality, they represented the interests of Ricardo Mendez. And there he was. Sitting in the front row behind his lawyers, Ricardo Mendez watched the millionaire's entrance with a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. Impeccably dressed, exuding an aura of political respectability that he had carefully cultivated over the years, no one would suspect that this man had orchestrated the disappearance of his own daughter. Their eyes met briefly. No words were needed to communicate the hatred that flowed between them. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression and perceptive eyes, entered the room, immediately silencing everyone present. "Before we begin," she announced after the initial formalities, "I would like to clarify that, although this case has attracted media attention, I will conduct this procedure with the rigor and discretion that a situation involving a minor requires." Her gaze fell on the girl, who was now sitting nervously next to the millionaire. "You must be the young lady at the center of this issue," she said, softening her tone slightly. "Don't worry, dear. We are all here to ensure your well-being." The process began with the formal presentations of the case. The millionaire's lawyer presented clearly and concisely the situation, the discovery of the girl, the DNA tests confirming the kinship, the desire of his client to obtain legal guardianship of his niece. "My client offers not only financial stability," he argued, "but more importantly, a loving and safe home for a child who has already faced too many adversities in her short life." The representative of the state countered with equal firmness. "Although we recognize the apparent good intentions of the applicant, we question his emotional and psychological capacity to care for a child. The gentleman in question has no history of stable relationships, demonstrates documented workaholic behaviors, and, more worryingly, has a history of family estrangement with his own sister, the biological mother of the minor." The mention of Laura made the millionaire clench his fists under the table. A small hand found his, offering a silent comfort that surprised him again. The hearing continued with expert testimonies. The personal physician who had examined the girl, a child, a psychologist who had conducted preliminary sessions. Even the housekeeper was called to testify about the changes in the child's routine and behavior since her arrival at the mansion. Then, the moment the millionaire feared most arrived. The judge requested to speak with the girl alone in her chambers. "It's standard procedure," she explained gently to the visibly apprehensive child. "Just a conversation to get to know your feelings about all this better." Before the girl followed the court officer, the millionaire bent down to be at her eye level. "Remember, just tell the truth. There's no right or wrong answer, just what you feel." She nodded seriously and, clutching the bear tightly, followed to the judge's chambers. The next 30 minutes were the longest of the millionaire's life. He alternated between pacing nervously in the hallway and sitting rigidly, imagining what was happening in that closed room, what questions were being asked, what was the girl answering, and more importantly, did she understand enough about her own situation to express her wishes? When the door finally opened, the girl emerged with her face washed with recent tears, but a determined look that he was beginning to recognize. The judge followed her, her professional expression carefully maintained, although there was something in her eyes that wasn't there before. A softness, perhaps. "Let's resume the session," she announced simply. Back in the room, the representative of the state was preparing to present his final argument when the back door suddenly opened. A middle-aged woman, visibly nervous, entered accompanied by the millionaire's private investigator. "Your Honor, I request permission to present a key witness who has just agreed to testify," requested the millionaire's lawyer, rising abruptly. The judge narrowed her eyes, observing the newcomer, and this lady would be Marcia Regina dos Santos, known as Cedar, the woman who kept the minor under her care in recent years, after the death of Laura Silva. A murmur ran through the room. Ricardo Mendez stood up abruptly, whispering something urgently into the ear of his lawyer, who immediately protested, "Your Honor, this is a clear attempt to disrupt the process with last-minute witnesses who have not been properly prepared or investigated." The judge raised her hand, silencing him. "Considering the nature of this case and the well-being of the minor as the top priority, I will allow the testimony." She turned to the trembling woman. "Ms. Santos, are you aware that you will speak under oath and that lying before this court is a crime?" "Yes, ma'am," she replied in a weak voice, avoiding looking in the direction of Ricardo Mendez. Over the next 40 minutes, a story of manipulation, blackmail, and fear unfolded before the astonished court. Marcia revealed how she had been hired to temporarily care for a newborn baby after the mother's death in a complicated birth in an illegal clinic. "I was told it would be for a few weeks until they found a suitable family for adoption," she explained, twisting a handkerchief nervously between her fingers. "But weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. Every time I asked about the girl's fate, I received more money and more threats." "Who made these payments and threats?" asked the millionaire's lawyer. Marcia hesitated, casting a fearful glance at Ricardo Mendez before answering. "Never directly. Always intermediaries. But I knew. Everyone knew who was behind it all. And why did the minor end up on the streets?" The woman lowered her head, tears flowing freely. "I have problems, addictions. Sometimes I wasn't a good caregiver. A few weeks ago, when I was unwell, she ran away. When I came to, I looked everywhere, but I couldn't find her. I was afraid of the consequences if I told them I had lost her, so I ran away too." The girl, who had heard everything in silence, clung to the teddy bear tightly, her face a mask of complex emotions for someone so young. The lawyer approached Marcia with an envelope. "Do you recognize these documents?" She examined the contents with wide eyes. "Yes, these are the original papers they gave me along with the baby, the mother's birth certificate, some medical exams, and—" She hesitated. "Specific instructions on how to proceed if anyone came looking for her." "And who signed these instructions?" With trembling hands, Marcia turned the last page and pointed to an elegant signature on the footer. "Ricardo Mendez." Chaos erupted in the room. Ricardo stood up, shouting about forgeries and setups, while his legal team desperately tried to restore order. The judge banged her gavel repeatedly, demanding silence. Amid the confusion, the millionaire felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the feeling that perhaps justice was still possible in this world. The victory in The preliminary hearing was only the first step in a battle that promised to be long and exhausting. The judge granted temporary custody to the millionaire, but conditional on weekly psychological and social follow-up visits. Ricardo Mendez, although temporarily cornered by the revelations, would not be long in counter-attacking. A man of his power and influence rarely accepted defeat without using all available resources. As the weeks passed, a surprisingly comfortable routine established itself in the mansion. The millionaire, for the first time in years, began to delegate professional responsibilities to be more present in the girl's day-to-day life. He participated in meals, helped with lessons from the new private school where he had enrolled her, and even tried, with comical results, to braid her hair in the morning. The housekeeper, who had initially observed this new dynamic with skepticism, now smiled secretly when catching scenes she had never imagined possible. The feared businessman sitting on the floor of the living room, building castles of colorful blocks, or reading stories before bed, changing voices for each character. The most remarkable transformation, however, was in the child herself. The permanently alert eyes now allowed themselves moments of relaxation. The body, once always tense, gradually relaxed, and her smile, once rare and hesitant, became more and more frequent. On a particularly pleasant Sunday afternoon, while playing in the garden, she surprised the millionaire with a question: "Can I call you uncle?" The simplicity of the request, the normalcy it represented, caught him off guard. A lump formed in his throat. "Of course you can," he replied, trying to disguise the emotion that overwhelmed him. She was silent for a few moments, as if carefully evaluating her next words. "And if one day I want to call you Dad?" The millionaire felt the world stop momentarily. In all his life of material achievements, nothing had prepared him for the impact of that little phrase. "It would be the greatest honor of my life," he managed to say finally, his voice reduced to a whisper. The girl smiled, satisfied, and turned her attention back to the game they were sharing, as if she hadn't just completely changed the universe of the man beside her. It was the next morning that the perfect storm began to brew. The lawyer arrived at the mansion with a grave expression, carrying under his arm a folder of documents and the day's newspapers. "He's launched his counterattack," he announced without preamble, spreading the newspapers on the study table. The headlines varied in sensationalism, but all followed the same narrative: "Unstable businessman kidnaps child," or "Obsessive millionaire uses fortune to buy custody of minor," and even "Sources close to the situation reveal history of mental illness in businessman battling for custody." "How did he pull this off?" asked the millionaire, incredulously flipping through the slanderous articles. "Money, influence, and desperation," replied the lawyer. "Three powerful forces when combined, but that's not the worst of it." He removed an official document from the folder and extended it across the table. "He's filing for mental incompetence. He claims that you suffer from untreated obsessive-compulsive disorder, that the fixation on the child is the result of a psychological breakdown related to the guilt over your sister's death, and that you represent a danger to the minor and to yourself." The millionaire felt the blood run cold in his veins. He can't just make up diagnoses. He can, if he has doctors willing to testify in his favor, and apparently he does. He's requesting a full forensic psychiatric evaluation and the immediate suspension of temporary custody until the completion of that evaluation. The door of the study opened suddenly, revealing the girl standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. How long had she been there? How much had she heard? "Are you sick?" she asked in a trembling voice. "Are they going to take me away?" The millionaire stood up immediately, kneeling to be at her eye level. "No, honey, I'm not sick, and no one is going to take you anywhere, I promise." But the damage had already been done. The fear of abandonment, so deeply rooted in her small being, resurfaced with full force. In the days that followed, the girl began to exhibit behaviors that had already begun to disappear, hiding food under the mattress, startling at sudden movements, waking up screaming in the middle of the night. To make matters worse, the judge granted the request for a psychiatric evaluation. The millionaire was forced to undergo a battery of humiliating tests and interviews conducted by a clearly biased specialist appointed by the other party. "How long have you been experiencing these rescue impulses?" asked the psychiatrist with feigned concern. "It's common for patients with your profile to develop fantasies of heroism as compensation for past failures." "I don't have rescue impulses," replied the millionaire through gritted teeth. "I'm just trying to take care of my niece as any decent person would." "Interesting that you use the term decent. Do you feel you need to prove your decency? Perhaps compensate for past actions that you consider indecent?" The sessions left him mentally exhausted and emotionally drained. He returned home feeling violated, exposed, as if every aspect of his personality was being distorted and pathologized. The last straw came in the form of a court notification. While the evaluation was not completed, the girl would be temporarily placed in a neutral foster home. The handover was to take place in 48 hours. "They can't do this!" he exploded before the lawyer. "I'm going to lose custody for submitting to an evaluation they themselves demanded. What kind of system is this?" "It's a system that can be manipulated by people with the right connections," replied the lawyer, equally frustrated. "We are filing appeals, but we need to prepare for the worst." That night, the millionaire faced the most difficult task of his life, explaining to the girl that temporarily she would need to stay away from him. Sitting on the edge of her bed, with the teddy bear as a silent witness, he sought words that could soften the inevitable blow. "Remember when I told you, we're fighting?" he began softly. "Sometimes in a fight we need to step back a little to then move forward stronger." Her eyes were already filling with tears. "They're going to take me." It wasn't a question. "For a very short time," he assured, holding her small hands, "and I'll visit you every day for as long as they allow me." "Is it because of that man who looks angry, isn't it? The one who was in court?" The millionaire hesitated. How to explain to a child the calculated cruelty, the cold revenge of Ricardo Mendez? Yes, he's scared. Scared of what? That they'll discover the truth, that everyone will know what he did. The girl remained silent for a long moment, processing that information in the way that only children can, with a clarity that many adults have lost. "He's my dad, isn't he? The bad man. That's why he doesn't want me." The question hit him like a punch. How had she come to this conclusion? Had she overheard a conversation, sensed it from the fragments of information she picked up? "What makes you think that?" he asked carefully. "I heard the housekeeper talking on the phone. She said that the biological father is doing everything to prevent the adoption. And I saw how he looked at me in court, like he knew me, but didn't want to know me." The millionaire took a deep breath. He had promised himself never to lie to her, even when the truth was painful. "Yes, from what we know, he is your biological father, but that doesn't mean anything beyond biology. A real father is the one who loves, protects, and cares, and I promise to be that person for you if you let me." She nodded slowly, the tears now running freely down her face. "What if you give up? What if it takes too long? What if I never see you again?" Each question was a stab in his heart. The millionaire pulled her into a tight hug, allowing his own tears to finally fall. "Listen carefully," he said in a choked voice. "I will never, ever give up on you, no matter how long it takes, no matter what happens. You are my family, the only family I have left, and real families never abandon each other." That night, He slept on the floor next to her bed, holding her hand until sleep finally overcame her. The next morning, both would face the forced separation, with courage but with hearts heavy with uncertainty. What neither of them knew was that, while they slept, the private investigator made a discovery that would completely change the course of the battle. A discovery that had the potential to expose not only Ricardo Mendez's manipulations, but a scheme much larger and more sinister than anyone could imagine. The foster care center was an old building with exposed brick, narrow windows, and a small courtyard surrounded by high fences. Although clean and well managed, there was an institutional coldness to it that was impossible to ignore. The millionaire parked his car at the entrance, taking a deep breath to gather courage. It was the third consecutive day of visits since the girl had been removed from his home. 60 supervised minutes a day was all the court had granted him, while the process dragged on. Upon entering the visiting room, he found her sitting alone at a table, drawing intently. His heart tightened as he noticed how, in just 3 days, she seemed to have lost weight, and how the dark circles had returned under her eyes. "Hey, kiddo," he called softly. She looked up, and for a fleeting moment, her face lit up. Then, as if remembering that she shouldn't show too much emotion, she recomposed herself into a more restrained expression. "Hi," she replied simply, pushing the drawing towards him. It was a house, not the imposing mansion where they had lived briefly together, but a simpler, colorful building with a garden full of flowers and 2 figures holding hands at the door. "It's beautiful," he commented, sitting down beside her. "Who are these? People?" "Us," she replied, with the direct simplicity of children. "When all this is over." The contained hope in that simple sentence moved him deeply. Despite everything, she still believed in a future together. She still trusted that he would be able to bring her back. "How are they treating you here?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Okay. The lady who takes care of our room is nice, but there are a lot of kids, and some cry at night. There's a boy who has nightmares every night. And you? Have you been sleeping well?" She shrugged, a gesture that communicated more than words could. "I brought something for you," he said, taking a small object from his pocket. It was a cell phone, simple, prepaid, nothing flashy. "I know they don't let you have these here," he whispered, making sure the supervisor at the door couldn't hear. "But I wanted you to be able to call me if you needed to, at any time." Our contact between them was strictly regulated, part of the conditions imposed by the judge. But after 2 sleepless nights, imagining her alone and scared, the millionaire had decided to break that specific rule. The girl took the device carefully, quickly hiding it in her coat pocket. "Just press this button here," he explained discreetly. "My number is already saved." The remainder of the visit passed with seemingly light conversations about everyday life, but both felt the weight of the separation and the uncertainty of the future. When the time was up, the supervisor approached with that expression of false sympathy that the system's employees learn to cultivate. "We need to wrap it up for today, sir." The girl clung to the millionaire's hand with surprising force. "I don't want you to go," she whispered, her eyes pleading. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised, swallowing the lump in his throat. "And remember what we agreed on. If you need me any time." She nodded discreetly, touching the pocket where she had hidden the cell phone. On the way to the car, the millionaire felt the weight of the temporary defeat curve his shoulders. How could he have let the situation reach this point? How had Ricardo managed to manipulate the system so easily in his favor? His phone rang, interrupting the cycle of self-criticism. It was the investigator. "I need to see you immediately," said the voice on the other end, with unusual urgency. "I found something big." 30 minutes later, they were meeting in a discreet hotel room on the outskirts of town. The location had been chosen deliberately, away from the eyes and ears that certainly monitored the mansion and the Millionaire's offices. The investigator, a generally composed and professional man, exhibited a palpable agitation. On the coffee table, he spread photographs, documents, and printed digital files. "Where do I begin?" he murmured, more to himself than to his client. "At the beginning," replied the millionaire, the impatience evident in his voice. "Ricardo, Mendez isn't alone in this story. He's part of a network, a sophisticated organization that has been operating for years in the shadows, connecting powerful people to convenient children." "Child trafficking?" asked the millionaire, paling. "Not exactly, or at least not in the traditional sense. They call themselves family facilitators. They operate through clandestine clinics, disguised nursing homes, and a system of temporary shelters. They specialize in solving problems for politicians, businessmen, and celebrities." "What kind of problems?" "Unwanted pregnancies, illegitimate children, children with disabilities that could tarnish a perfect public image." The investigator passed a thick folder to the millionaire. "I've documented at least 7 similar cases in the last 10 years. Newborns who disappear from official records, mothers who die in suspicious circumstances during childbirth, adoptions that circumvent all legal procedures." The millionaire flipped through the documents, his stomach churning with each story. "And Ricardo, he's one of the founders, started small, helping political friends resolve delicate situations. Over time, it turned into a lucrative business." The investigator hesitated briefly. "Your sister wasn't the first to go through that clandestine clinic, but she may have been the only one who tried to escape the system." "What do you mean?" "I found this." He extended a worn diary with a faded blue cover. "It belonged to a nurse who worked at the clinic. She secretly documented what happened there until she was found dead from an overdose 3 weeks later." The millionaire opened the diary with trembling hands. Among clinical reports and coded observations, a name jumped off the page: Laura Silva. Patient LS arrived today, 8th month of gestation, apparently in premature labor. Different from the others, asks questions, challenges, brought a suitcase as if she planned to leave with the baby. "The doctor instructed me to double the sedation after delivery. The client is important," he said. "There can be no complications." In another entry, a few pages later, LS gave birth to a healthy baby girl, 7 pounds. Tried to hold her, but was prevented by protocol. Cried when they took the child away. Unlike the others, who are kept sedated, she fights the medication. I discovered her today trying to get up. Said she needed to deliver something to her daughter. I alerted the doctor. The last mention, dated 3 days later. Emergency during the night. LS had severe bleeding, convulsions. The doctor was slow to respond, too late when he arrived. Death confirmed at 3:17 a.m. The body was removed immediately. No official record. The child had already been delivered to the designated temporary caregiver. Something about this case deeply disturbs me. It's my last week here. The millionaire closed the diary, nauseated. The reality of what had happened to his sister was even more terrible than he had imagined. Not only abandoned by her family, but a victim of a cruel system that had treated her as disposable. She tried to fight, he murmured, feeling tears burn his eyes. Even at the end, she tried to protect her daughter. And she succeeded, in a way, replied the investigator, pointing to a photograph. Recognize this? It was the necklace, the broken star. The nurse recorded that, in the confusion after delivery, Laura managed to put something in the baby's blanket, a keepsake that the temporary caregiver ended up keeping with the child against protocols. The necklace was a sign, the millionaire understood. She knew that, if I ever saw it. Exactly. Your sister found a way to leave a clue, even when everything seemed lost. A heavy silence settled in the room as the millionaire absorbed the magnitude of that revelation. It wasn't just about Ricardo Mendez trying to hide a mistake from the past. It was a larger, darker conspiracy that had claimed his sister's life and condemned his niece to years of neglect. "How do we prove this?" he asked finally, a steely determination crystallizing in his voice. "How do we take them all down?" The investigator smiled for the first time. "I've already started. Anonymously, obviously. I leaked some information to investigative journalists. 3 different publications are following leads that will take them to the same documents I found." He indicated another file. "In addition, I've identified 2 former employees of the organization willing to testify in exchange for immunity. And there's this." He handed the millionaire a small flash drive. "Recordings, conversations between Ricardo and other members of the network, including specific discussions about your niece and the efforts to keep her hidden from you, obtained through methods that may not be entirely orthodox. The legality of this evidence may be questioned in court," warned the millionaire, who knew the complexities of the judicial system well. "Yes, but in the court of public opinion, devastating. And some of these recordings mention people even more powerful than Ricardo, people who wouldn't want to be associated with this scandal." A plan began to form in the millionaire's mind. It wouldn't be a clean or simple battle, but for the first time in weeks, he felt something akin to hope. "How long do we need to organize all this coherently? With a dedicated team, 3, maybe 4 days." The millionaire checked his watch. It was almost 10 at night. "Start now. Hire whoever you need. I want everything ready as quickly as possible." When the investigator left, the millionaire remained alone in the hotel room, contemplating the revelations of that night. He thought of his sister fighting until her last moment to protect her daughter. He thought of his niece, alone in that impersonal shelter. He thought of the lost years that could never be recovered. His phone vibrated with a message, unknown number, but the content left no doubt about the sender. "Good night, Uncle. Everything's okay. But I wish you were here." With tearful eyes, he replied simply, "I'll be there soon, I promise. Be strong a little longer." Putting away the phone, the millionaire made a silent oath to the memory of Laura and to the future of her daughter. No one would hurt his family again, ever. The conference room of the Grand Central Hotel seethed with the presence of journalists, lawyers, and representatives of child protection organizations. Summoned with less than 24 hours' notice, the curiosity was palpable in the environment. At the head table, the millionaire sat impassively, flanked by his lawyer and the investigator. Before him, a mosaic of documents, photographs, and files, organized meticulously during 3 days and nights of relentless work. "I appreciate everyone's presence," he began, his voice calm, contrasting with the inner storm that consumed him. "What I am going to present today is not just my personal story, but the exposure of a system that has victimized vulnerable families for more than a decade." Over the next 90 minutes, a narrative unfolded that left the audience in shock. With surgical precision, the millionaire and his team presented documentary evidence, recorded testimonies, and financial records that revealed the existence and operation of the Family Facilitators Network. "This is not an isolated case of a custody dispute," he concluded, his voice now choked with emotion. "It's the tip of an iceberg of corruption, manipulation, and human tragedies deliberately hidden from the public." The questions came like an avalanche, and each answer was carefully calibrated to maximize media impact without compromising the ongoing legal strategies. When the conference ended 3 hours later, there was no doubt that the scandal would dominate the headlines for weeks. "Did it work?" he asked the press aide as they left the premises through the back exit, avoiding the frenzy of cameras at the main entrance. Beyond expectations, it's on every channel. Trending topics, guaranteed front page tomorrow. The professional consulted his tablet, and the first official reaction has already come out. Ricardo's party issued a statement saying they are deeply concerned about the allegations and that he is temporarily stepping down from his duties until the facts are clarified. Abandoning ship at the first sign of water, commented the millionaire with a bitter smile. Typical. In the car, as they drove to the courthouse for the hearing to review temporary custody, the lawyer updated him on the latest developments. The judge has already been informed about the new evidence. Officially, she shouldn't be influenced by media coverage, but she's human, completed the millionaire. And now she has the political cover she needs to make the right decision without fearing reprisals. Exactly. In addition, the district attorney has already requested the opening of a formal investigation to investigate Ricardo and his associates. 3 different detectives are vying for the case, considering the visibility it will bring. The millionaire's cell phone vibrated. Message from the girl. Saw you on the TV in the cafeteria. The supervisor got mad and changed the channel, but everyone had already seen it. You looked like a hero. His heart tightened. A hero? No. A man trying belatedly to do what was right. A man seeking redemption for failures he could never truly compensate for. The courthouse was surrounded by reporters when they arrived. Cameras and microphones were thrust in their direction. Overlapping voices firing questions that he firmly ignored, maintaining a serious expression as he climbed the marble steps. Inside, the scene was completely different from the previous. Hearing, the legal team representing the state, but which everyone now knew was funded by Ricardo, seemed withered, disorganized. Ricardo himself was conspicuously absent. Where is he? Asked the millionaire to the lawyer in a low voice. Sources say he's on his way to the airport, private flight to Paraguay, where he has connections. Coward to the end, he murmured, feeling a mixture of contempt and relief. The judge entered the room with firm steps and a stern expression. After the initial formalities, she addressed directly to the point. In light of the new evidence presented, and the clear indication of procedural manipulation, this court immediately revokes the order for temporary foster care of the minor. Her voice showed no emotion, only the legal certainty of someone who recognizes a mistake of the system. Temporary custody is restored to the applicant until the conclusion of the formal adoption process, which will have top priority. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. The millionaire closed his eyes briefly, allowing the relief to wash over him. There is one more matter, continued the judge. This court issues, at this time, an order for in-depth investigation into all allegations presented in the documentation submitted. If confirmed, we will be facing one of the biggest scandals of corruption involving the child protection system in the history of this state. When the session ended, the millionaire could barely contain his anxiety. All that mattered now was to find the girl, bring her home, rebuild the security that had been so abruptly interrupted. The foster care center, which only a few days before seemed an impenetrable fortress, now seemed smaller, more mundane. Employees who previously treated him with professional distance now seemed almost subservient, aware of the dramatic change in circumstances. The girl was waiting in the same visiting room, but this time standing, a small backpack with her few belongings already prepared beside her. When she saw him enter, there was no hesitation. She ran towards him and threw herself into his arms, with enough force to almost knock him down. "You did it," she whispered against his shoulder, her voice choked with emotion. "You really did it." "I promised, didn't I?" he replied, lifting her into his arms as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Let's go home." In the car, she kept the teddy bear firmly embraced, looking out the window as if fearing that the city might suddenly swallow her again. He, the bad man, is he going to come back to get me? The millionaire chose his words carefully. No, he's on the run, and a lot of important people are looking for him now. He'll never be able to hurt you or keep me away from you again. Because of the bad things he did. Yes, and because finally people discovered the truth. She nodded, processing the information with that ancient wisdom that sometimes surfaced. In her eyes, like my mom, you said she tried to tell the truth too. Yes, and she was very brave for that. The girl was silent for a moment, contemplating the necklace that never left her neck. I think we're alike then, brave. Without a doubt, he agreed, swallowing the lump in his throat. Exactly like her. Upon arriving at the mansion, a surprise awaited at the entrance. The housekeeper, normally so restrained, had coordinated a small celebration. The kitchen was filled with the girl's favorite sweets. Colorful balloons decorated the living room, and a makeshift banner with the words, "Welcome back," hung over the door. Even the security guards, men of few words and stern expressions, seemed to smile discreetly as the girl ran back to her room, anxiously checking if everything remained as she had left it. Later, when the initial excitement subsided and the house began to quiet down, the millionaire found her sitting on the garden bench, contemplating the stars that were beginning to dot the night sky. "Can I sit down?" he asked softly. She moved to the side, making space. "I have an important question," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Something I should have asked a long time ago." The girl looked at him curiously. "I would like to know if you would allow me to adopt you. Officially, legally, forever." Her eyes widened. It means that I would be your dad. Not just your uncle or guardian, your dad in every way that matters. And I would have your last name, if you want. And no one could separate us again? No one. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached out to touch the millionaire's face, studying every line and expression as if verifying the sincerity behind those words. Finally, with a smile that lit up the night, she replied, "Yes, I want to be your daughter. For real. Forever." At that moment, under the starry sky, something was finally completed. The broken star that for so long had symbolized loss and separation now represented something new. The beginning of a family rebuilt from the ashes of the past. 1 year later, the house was no longer the same. The cold and impersonal mansion had transformed into a vibrant home where colorful drawings decorated previously austere walls and laughter echoed through formerly silent hallways. The millionaire was no longer the same either. The ruthless businessman who lived exclusively for work now understood the value of closing the laptop in time to watch school performances. The dark circles from sleepless nights over contracts had been replaced by dark circles from night's comforting nightmares that, although less frequent, still arose occasionally. But the greatest transformation was visible in the girl, or rather in Isabella, the name she chose herself after the official adoption, when she finally had the right to decide what she would be called in the world. Isabella meant consecrated to God, she explained to her adoptive father after carefully researching in a book of names, "because I think someone up there took care of me until you found me." On that sunny Saturday morning, Isabella ran through the garden with inexhaustible energy, chasing the ball her father had just thrown. Her hair, now healthy and shiny, danced in the wind as she laughed freely, without a trace of the constant fear that had previously shadowed her gaze. "I got it!" she shouted triumphantly, raising the ball above her head. "Did you see that? I didn't even need to run much." "I sure did," he replied, marveling as always at the resilience of children, at the way they flourish when they finally find fertile ground for their roots. The housekeeper approached discreetly, carrying a tray with fresh lemonade. "Dr. Martins has just arrived, sir." "Thank you. Tell her we're coming." Isabella ran back, her eyes sparkling. "The psychologist is here." "Yes. Are you ready for our session today?" The girl nodded enthusiastically. The family therapy sessions, initially a court requirement for the adoption, had become a valuable ritual that both appreciated. A safe space where they could process together the scars of the past and build tools for the future. Dr. Martins, a middle-aged woman with a gentle smile and perceptive eyes, waited for them in the living room, now rearranged with comfortable sofas instead of the old designer furniture, chosen more to impress than to welcome. "Good morning to you both. How was the week?" The session progressed naturally, with Isabella sharing excitedly about her new project at school, a research on stars and constellations, and the millionaire reporting the challenges of balancing professional responsibilities with fatherhood. "I had to cancel a business trip because it would coincide with her science presentation," he explained, still seeming slightly guilty about the decision that, a year ago, would have been unthinkable. "And how did you feel making that decision?" asked the therapist. "Surprisingly good. The world didn't end because I postponed a meeting after all," he replied with a smile. "And seeing her face when she realized I would be in the front row, priceless." Dr. Martin smiled, observing the evident connection between the two. "Isabella, remember that in the last session we talked about asking your dad something important? Something you were curious about?" The girl suddenly became more serious, playing nervously with the hem of her shirt. "Yes," she murmured. "Would you like to ask that question today?" Isabella took a deep breath, gathering courage, and then looked directly at the millionaire. "Why didn't you come looking for me before? If my mum was your sister, why did you wait so long?" The question hung in the air, heavy and inevitable. It was something he knew he would one day need to answer, although he dreaded that moment. "Because I didn't know you existed," he began, choosing his words carefully, "and that happened because of bad choices I made in the past." With gentleness, but without omitting the fundamental truths, he explained how he had distanced himself from his sister when she needed him most, how he had allowed pride and social pressure to prevent him from supporting her during the pregnancy. "When your mom found out she was pregnant, I should have been her protector. Instead, I kept silent when people like Ricardo pressured her. I was afraid of losing my position, my money, my reputation." His voice choked slightly. "It was the worst decision of my life, and if I could go back, would you have helped her?" asked Isabella, her eyes fixed on him. "With all my strength, I would have been the brother she deserved. And if I knew about you, I would have moved heaven and earth to find her from day one." The girl absorbed those words in silence, processing them at her own pace. "So, you regretted what you did?" "Every day, and I will continue to regret it for the rest of my life. But I learned that although we cannot change the past, we can choose what we do with the present." Isabella nodded slowly, understanding more than many adults would be capable of. "Like the necklace," she said finally, "the broken star." "What do you mean, honey?" "Even broken, the parts still exist. We can't make it whole again like it was before, but we can put the pieces together and make something new." The millionaire felt tears burn his eyes. Where did so much wisdom come from? "In someone so young." "Exactly like that," he agreed, his voice choked. After the session, they walked together through the garden, a ritual they had developed to process the intense emotions that sometimes arose during therapy. Autumn painted the trees with golden and red hues, and dry leaves crunched under their feet. "Dad," called Isabella, the word that still moved him every time he heard it. "I think she would be happy." Who, honey? My mom. I think she would be happy to see us together, to know that the necklace worked. He gently squeezed the small hand in his. I'm sure she is. At the end of that afternoon, as the sun set in orange tones on the horizon, Isabella asked to visit a special place, the small memorial they had created together in the garden, a quiet space with a stone bench and carefully chosen flowers. In the center, a simple plaque, Laura Silva, beloved sister, courageous mother, always in our hearts. The girl knelt and carefully placed there a new addition, a small framed drawing showing 3 figures holding hands, a woman with wings, a tall man, and a smiling child. Above them, a star shone brightly. It's our family, she explained simply. All together, even if in a different way. The millionaire felt his heart expand with a mixture of pain and gratitude so intense that he could barely breathe. How could a child whom fate had entrusted to him have transformed his existence so completely? How had the chance, or was it providence, of an encounter on a rainy night forever changed the course of 2 lives that seemed destined for solitude? That night, as he tucked Isabella into bed, she held his arm before he could leave. Tell me a story, she asked, her eyes already heavy with sleep. Our story. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he began softly. Once upon a time, there was a very brave girl who carried a broken star around her neck, and a very lonely man who kept the other half without knowing what it really meant. Both were lost until fate brought them together on a rainy night. When he finished the story, Isabella was already sound asleep, the necklace secure between her small fingers, as always. The millionaire remained there for a moment, marveling at the everyday miracle of watching her breathe peacefully, safe and loved. In his study later, he made a decision that had been maturing for months. He typed an email to his executive team, informing them that he would be permanently reducing his operational role in the company to dedicate himself to a new project. A foundation dedicated to reforming the child protection system and supporting children in vulnerable situations. It would be called the Broken Star Foundation, in honor of the symbol that had changed everything. And its first goal would be to track down other possible victims of the Family Facilitators Network, reuniting families who, like theirs, had been separated by greed and cruelty. In his desk drawer rested the most valuable document he had ever possessed, the official adoption certificate with the name Isabella Silva, now legally transformed into Isabella Silva Mendonça, symbolically uniting the legacy of Laura with the new path they were building together. Outside, the moon illuminated the garden, where one day he had found only emptiness and now discovered purpose. Where he had once sought power and recognition, he now found meaning in the simple act of being a father. Where once there was only a rich man and his empire, now flourished a family rebuilt from the ashes of the past. Redemption, he discovered, didn't come in the form of grand heroic gestures, but in the daily patience of gluing, piece by piece, the fragments of broken lives. In the commitment to transform pain into healing, in the courage to face past mistakes, and choose, with each new dawn, to be better than he was yesterday. And somewhere, perhaps beyond the stars that Isabella loved to study so much, he liked to imagine Laura smiling, finally at peace to see her last and most precious gift in good. Hands, a broken star, 2 lives shattered by fate, and a new constellation formed from the pieces reunited with love, patience, and hope. For sometimes, the universe has a peculiar way of uniting what should never have been separated. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive new stories every day. What would you do in the Millionaire's place? Comment below and share this story with someone special